with a disease of horror. This week is P is for pain. People hate change, which is probably why horror likes to give it a home. Transformation is perhaps the single scariest idea in horror, whether it's Dr. Jekyll, werewolves, or David Cronenberg's The Fly. All this shape-shifting scares us because it reminds us that we are not in control of our own mind, our own body. What is here today could be gone tomorrow. We could be gone tomorrow. In a single breath, we could be sick, be alien, or be crazy. Among special effects artists, Tom Savini holds a unique place. He is affectionately known as the Wizard of Gore, the man who put splatter on the map. In films like Dawn of the Dead, 78, and Friday the 13th, 80, he makes us believe that the carnage is for real. And he should know, he's seen carnage for real. Horror deals a lot with painful death because that's one of our fears, says Savini. We hate pain. We are afraid of pain. Everyone knows pain, but no one knows death. They see other people in death, but they don't know it. Death is something that is quite difficult for people to relate to, but pain is actually quite easy to relate to. They know pain because they have experienced it, and that's what makes them afraid. I have some asides here. It's then that another species of illusionist is required, one who will put before the camera creatures that no zoo has ever displayed, no biologist ever cataloged. These are the monster makers who, with latex, glue, and paint, daily transform actors and actresses into life forms that will astonish, appall, and on occasion seduce us. Clive Barker. Above, Friday the 13th, opposite Night of the Living Dead. Another quick quote: the impact of special makeup effects upon audience and industry is unquestionable. From John Carpenter. So we have Friday the 13th and Night of the Living Dead. Born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Savini cites his first influence as the legendary silent actor and makeup artist Lon Chaney Sr. At the age of 13, he saw James Cagney's portrayal of Chaney in Man of a Thousand Faces, 57. Until that point, I believed that Frankenstein, the creature from the Black Lagoon, they were all real. For the first time in my life, I was shown that somebody had to create those monsters, and I wanted it to be me. What was great about Lon Chaney was that he treated his face as three-dimensional canvas. When he pulled his nose up to make his nostrils flare, he actually painted them larger. He didn't just depend on his own nostrils. That's an illusion, which is what makeup effects really are. When other children were out playing baseball, Savini was in his bedroom making his face or those of the neighborhood kids. At the age of 14, he had landed his first professional employment as part of a traveling act that performed horror and magic shows in movie theaters. The following year, he found a non-paying job creating the makeup for horror host Chilly Billy Cardille and various monsters on Pittsburgh Television's Chiller Theater. Savini first met George Romero during his junior year of high school. Although the projects they discussed never got made, Romero remembered him 3 years later when he was preparing Night of the Living Dead, 68. Romero asked to see samples of his makeup skills, but before that could happen, Savini was called into the army and sent to Vietnam as a combat photographer. I've been called the king of splatter and the king of gore, says Savini, and that's because the severed heads or the body parts have to be real to me. I have to get the same feeling that I had when I saw the real gore in Vietnam as a photographer. My job was to go in after a battle and photograph the damage to machines and people. I saw a lot of gore, the way stuff really looks. I saw a lot of anatomically correct corpses. I hate it when I see a movie and someone dies and they shut their mouth and they assume this peaceful look on their face. Well, you're not pretty when you die. I try to show what's more realistic, that more realistically. It's not just the physical damage, it's the expression of the body. It's a feeling that you have about the body. If I don't get the same feeling from the fake props as I did when I get the real stuff, then it's not real enough for me. Following his discharge, Savini found work as an actor and makeup artist in the local theater in North Carolina. He made some extra cash painting signs, and it was while he was delivering a consignment to a bar that he met art director Forrest Carpenter, who looked at his portfolio and hired him as Alan Ornsby makeup assistant on Bob Clark's Death Dream, aka Dead of Night, 1972, and Deranged, 74, the latter based on the life of Wisconsin serial killer Ed Gein. A lot of violence you see in movies today is pornography, says Savini. Some directors go in for a close-up of the cut throat or the gouged eye, and to me that is just like pornography. Personally, I'm not a gore hound. I think the less you show, the better, because you can make it far more hideous than the screenwriter wrote or something the effects guy created. What I imagine is a lot more horrible. I know that sounds strange coming from me. In the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974, there was hardly anything that you physically saw. It all happened under the frame, above the frame, behind the door, but there were people who swear they saw chainsaws ripping apart because they did see it. They completed it in their own mind. I have some sides. Makeup artist Tom Savini insists on having control over the staging of the shots in which his gore effects appear, and he is a better filmmaker than the clods who string the murders together. Kim Newman. When you're doing effects, you're just trying to get them to be okay and not look like effects. Less is more with these things because the more you leave to people's imaginations, the better the stuff looks. Joe Dante. And we have pictures of Lon Chaney Sr. and as the vampire in London After Midnight. And there's a list of selected Tom Savini films as well. Returning to Pittsburgh, he was quickly hired to do the makeup for George Romero's vampire film Martin, 76. Following the completion of that project, Savini moved back to North Carolina for a summer vacation. And one day a telegram arrived from Romero. It read, "Start thinking of ways to kill people." Oh, this is so heavy. The film was Dawn of the Dead, aka Zombies, 1978, the second chapter in Romero's Dead series. Third of that movie was improvised, explained Savini. We would sit around and think, let's tear his head off, or let's take a saw to the face and cut the top of his head off. We would go to the shopping mall at 7 at night and leave at 7 in the morning, and it was just the best fun you can imagine. The joy and happiness came from thinking of a way to kill people and then actually doing it. Sometimes when you're under pressure, you come up with your best ideas. On some nights, Savini would turn to 300 extras into zombies. There was me and an assistant to do the straight makeup. For a few days, we brought 4 or 5 friends in and made a little zombie assembly line. They would paint the zombies gray and I would do the gore makeup. If we knew that a zombie was going to die a glorious death hanging onto a car, then I would double them and do the stunt. We would ask some of the zombies if they could just leave the makeup on and come back tomorrow. They would go home, sleep in it, and we'd touch it up a bit, and then they'd come back. Every day was Halloween. It was wonderful. After his work on Sean Cunningham's successful slasher movie Friday the 13th, 1980, Savini went on to work on a string of similar splatter projects, including Maniac, 1980, The Burning, 1980, and The Prowler, aka Rosemary's Killer, 1981. There was a plethora of splatter movies coming out, he recalls, and I was going from one to another using the same cutthroat appliance. The only thing that was changing was the murder weapon. It's in my job to show everything, and I've been called a sick puppy, but I always remind them that I don't write this stuff. My job is to take the script and create as realistically as possible what the writer has written. In my mind, what makes an effect successful is the fact that it's really an illusion. It's a magic trick. I have to misdirect you. I have to look you over here. I have to make you look over here while I'm pulling the flowers out of my back pocket. In movies, we misdirect you constantly with dialogue, music, sound effects. The best way to scare you is to get you off guard. Most of our effects are mechanical devices that pump in squirts. So to make the effect work, we have to think of it as a magic trick. I imagine it on the screen, and that tells me what I have to see to make me believe that it is real. By imagining that I need to see, then I know what to show you. Quote, when it gets right down to it, it was Jack Pierce who really created the Frankenstein monster. I was merely the animation and the costume. Boris Karloff. Jack Pierce did really feel that he made these people like he was a god who created human beings. In the morning, he'd be dressed in white as if he were in a hospital to perform an operation. Elsa Lanchester. And we have above, Tom Savini and Puppethead. Behind the scenes, Friday the 13th, the final chapter. And then we have Jack Pierce transformed Boris Karloff into the monster in Frankenstein, 1931. One of my philosophies is to use the real actor as much as possible. It is important for the audience to see the pain and the violence happen to a real person. So I have to cut a throat. Instead of making a fake head and using a real knife, I will make a blade with a groove that looks like it's in the throat when it's on. By using the real actor, you can have the changes in facial expression, the scream, and the even blood coming out of the knife. The blood is pumped in by a hypodermic syringe that you don't know about. That's an example of a mechanical device fooling you, just like a magician would. What I try to do is fool you by using a real person as much as possible because you relate to the real person. You can tell almost immediately if it's fake head. But when it's happening in a real face or a real hand that's moving realistically, then you are just sucked in. I think it's true when some critics say our movie makers are desensitizing people to violence, he continues. When my daughter was 5 years old, she would see us smacking people on the head with rubber hammers. One day, she sneaked up on one of the effects guys and clobbered him with one of the real hammers. We had a long talk, and now she knows the difference. Savini continued his association with Romero in such films as Creepshow, 82, and the third installment of the Dead series, Day of the Dead, 85. In Day of the Dead, there was a character called Rhodes, played by Joe Pilato. This guy's shooting people at random and blowing them away, so he had to die gloriously. So we said, well, let's just tear him in half. We could have done it with a fake body and torn him in half, but it would not have had the same impact or emotion. We used his real head and arms and gave him a fake foam rubber chest. His real body was under a platform with a fake body placed under the armpits. It was stuffed with anything we could find from the food table and intestines that we had used throughout the film. Unfortunately, they were left in a refrigerator that was unplugged, and the smell was incredible. We filled it with guts and chicken livers, shrimp dip, apple cores, whatever we could find. We couldn't protect him with anything up his nose, but we sure protected ourselves with respirators. So he was getting that stench. We were actually pumping blood into this cavity as well, so it's pretty juicy as the zombies tore into the flesh and walked away with his lower body. His expression of sickness was very real because he was getting the stench from that stuff. It was even more real afterwards when the camera stopped rolling. Then he really looked like he was going to heat. We got pictures. Tom Savini behind the scenes, Friday 13th. Tom Savini as the Creep in Creepshow 2. Friday 13th, the final chapter, and Above the Prowler. When George Romero decided to remake his classic Night of the Living Dead for commercial and copyright reasons, he returned to his longtime makeup collaborator to direct. It is a film about people facing an external threat, says Savini. In a way, the threat doesn't matter. It's the people and their response that matters. The people in the house can pull together, they can save themselves. If they can't, they'll die. I think zombies can still be scary. People have seen zombies and more zombies, so we knew if the zombies were going to be frightening, we would have had some things different. We wanted the zombies to be people. It's more of a challenge today to frighten film audiences, Savini believes. These days, you're not going to frighten audiences with more gore. Before effects became elaborate, a mere skeleton was scary. Effects guys like me spoiled people. The more we showed them, the more they wanted to see. We were in a position to try and outdo ourselves. In some ways, I became captive in my own success. And then we have an aside. It's as an audience member that I'm most indebted to them for those precious moments when the screen unveils a monster who will join the pantheon in my mind and there remain to delight, appall, and astonish me. Clive Barker. Night of the Living Dead. USA, 1990, director Tom Savini with Tony Todd, Patricia Tallman, Tom Tolles, McKee Anderson, William Butler, Kate Finneran, 21st Century Productions, Columbia Color. Savini's color remake of executive producer George Romero's 1968 classic is surprisingly faithful and effective, cleverly shifting the emphasis away from Ben, Todd, and onto Barbara, a tough-looking Tallman, as the heroic protagonist. This time, the flesh-eating zombies look genuinely dead and scary, thanks to John Woolwich and Everett Earl's makeup effects. And although Savini plays down the gore effects, there are some genuinely gruesome scenes. Unfortunately, this was not the box office success it should have been. That was P for pain. Good old Tom Savini. I actually have a Tom Savini story. It was my very first Texas Frightmare weekend, and we went to see, they were doing a screening of Spider Baby, which was Sid Haig's first film, and he was there hanging out, to be able to talk about the movie. And he had actually brought Tom Savini with him, as his date. So no one knew that Tom Savini was there. And my friend was outside and he was having a cigarette, and I was fairly drunk. And I had my drinks. And Tom Savini came and asked my friend for a light or whatever. And I made a complete fool out of myself and probably scared the crap out of him. Oh yeah, I remember why, because I was wearing a Planet Terror shirt, and he complimented my shirt, and I was just like, oh my God, it's you. But like I said, it was my very first nightmare, and I had been drinking. But yeah, so that's my Tom Savini story. So next week is Q for Quiet Men, and we are so close to being done. So thank you for reading with me, and I will see you next week.